More details are coming out about Conrad Hussey's dismissal from Florida State, and it involves an altercation. Let's talk about it here on Locked On Seminoles.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a special edition of Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Football season is really close now. Just visit the FanDuel app and start planning for your future bets today. We have been privy to all kinds of things in college football over the last several years with media, with the internet having so many different social media platforms, TikTok, YouTube, etc. There's always something extra you can pick up. But every now and then, it's just a traditional article that you run across and you see something and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Let me see that again. Florida State Conrad Hussey was dismissed. According to Mike Norvell, he's no longer with the football team. But he did not divulge any commentary. I talked about that on this morning's podcast here on Locked On Seminoles. And I get it. Sometimes it's very touchy. But I just left it at that. I figured eventually, somewhere down the road, it would come about. Well, according to Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports, take it for what it's worth, he said there was an altercation with the position coach. Now, altercation can be defined in a lot of ways. That's a very subjective term, and it's not a really easy one to break down. Let me put it to you like this, though. From my experience with college coaches, if it gets hands-on with the player and a coach, one or the other is probably going to end up leaving. I don't know which coach it was. I don't know why it started, but I do know, based on Mike Norvell, that Conrad Hussey is no longer a part of the Florida State football program. So I want to make a couple comments on that. Number one, I'm not going to put any blame on something that I didn't see with my own two eyes. No offense to Norvell or Coach White or anybody else. There's going to be a company line to a certain degree. Their company line right now is we're not telling you anything. But even if they did, again, I would want to see it. But this also goes back to something else that I pointed towards in my most recent podcast, talking about the culture. You've got to make sure people are there for the right reasons. And now I'm just going to add in that sometimes it just doesn't work. Again, I don't know whose fault it was, but if two guys do not get along well enough where it comes to an altercation, and I don't care if it was the coach's fault, the player's fault, or both, it's most likely a good idea that at least one of them departs. This is not a Florida State thing. This is an anybody thing, but it is very, very awkward. I don't want to see anybody have problems. And ironically, I knew Conrad during the recruiting process. He was always nice to me. Saw him at 7-on-7 tournaments. I saw him at St. Thomas Aquinas, where he played down in Fort Lauderdale under Roger and his great staff of coaches. Never thought anything about it. He's always nice. That being said, again, sometimes it's oil and water with a coach, and you're probably better off for making this decision. One of them probably needed to go. I wasn't there, but if you're having an altercation, I'm going to guess that it was pretty bad. And this may have been the last straw that broke the camel's back too. To that end, I also want to talk about the depth chart just for a second. And again, this is just a short pod. We'll have the normal Friday podcast early up tomorrow morning. Got a lot of things to, ironically, I was working on a podcast about the secondary because Surtain was up at the media podium and he gave a bunch of details. Shamar no, somebody will talk about here in just a second, but more tomorrow. There's a lot of young players moving up the list, but he talked about how the safeties, how they do different things in this defense, how they might be over a slot, they might be a receiver. They have a lot of different responsibilities. And it just got to the point where I was like, this is an interesting challenge. It's difficult, but you're losing one of the guys with some veteran leadership, and Conrad Hussey was going to be a third-year player. But at the same time, again, as I mentioned on this morning's pod, do you bring somebody over? Do you go out of your way to make somebody else have a little more responsibility? Is somebody ready for that? I loved how Surtain, by the way, just as a preliminary point, he pointed to all these players still, hey, camp's not over. All these jobs are still open. That's the way it should be. I mean, Surtain's one of the greatest DBs to ever play in the NFL. He knows the spot. But that's a different perspective when you go to the coaching side. Not everybody takes that. So good for Coach Surtain. That leads me to the next question. Who is that player going to be? Because Hussey was going to get reps. He played quite a bit last year. He's a very talented guy that can play in man coverage as a safety or as a corner. Like, he's physically gifted. So who's going to be that player at safety? At corner, it sounds like they got a ton of different guys that they could possibly use, and it's going to get kind of figured out. But at safety, you still got Barker. You still got Shaheem Brown. Surtain talked about him a little bit. Maybe one of the guys moves over. I mean, obviously, KJ Kirkland is definitely going to play, and there's definitely Edwin Joseph and Earl Little. But do you have enough depth? Does somebody like, does Ricky Knight play more than one spot? Does Charles Lester play more than one spot? Does Kai Bates play more than one spot? There are a lot of different things that go with this. But at the end of the day, even if you take a small step back, my biggest take is it's probably best that things move the way they did. And I wish Conrad Hussey nothing but the best wherever he goes. And obviously the best for Florida State too. It's unfortunate, but I thought it was just appropriate for me to do this quick podcast to talk about it, because this kind of stands alone. I didn't want this to be at the front of my Friday morning podcast. I wanted this to be separate. And I hope that Florida State gets it figured out and it works out for all parties involved. So again, Friday morning, we're going to have our normal pod. Going to go over Amaree Williams. He is maybe college football's only full-time two-way player. And I'm not talking about special teams and defense or offense. Full-time two-way player. Want to talk about him. He was very impressive during his press conference. And it's a kid I got to know a little bit because I went to see him practice once in high school. And I was impressed with him before his junior year of high school. We're going to talk about him. We're also going to go in, as I mentioned, to the defensive back room. It's a really interesting group. We're going to talk about it a little bit more detail and why replacing Hussey's challenging, but very, very doable. And then finally, looking at the list overall, kind of just going over everything. This football team is getting a little bit more hardened, and I love how the coaching staff is sticking to their guns. That's something else I talked about recently this week. I'm going to add on to that and talk about it from the offensive side as well as the defensive side, because if Florida State is going to surprise this year, they got to stick to their guns. They weren't consistent last year in so many ways. Discipline, like with the Hussey situation, was part of it. I think that has been fixed, and it's going to be a lot better for Florida State football moving forward. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Please hit that like, subscribe, and share this podcast. Comment down below if you're on YouTube or Apple, wherever. And please, if you're on the Apple app downloading these, make sure you hit the automatic download. I truly appreciate it. We will see you again tomorrow morning on Locked On Seminoles.